I just want to start to just sort of talk about, like, obviously there's two layers to this. There's differentiation, which is why we're here, and there's AI. And I think we're going to keep the focus on differentiation, but we'll just sort of dip in and out of AI as it comes up. Because I think it's definitely changing it. But as a lot of you said, we've been managing differentiation for years. So it's what are the tools we have now that really help us? Um, for me, the sort of the biggest, the clearest thing that I wanted to get across is open communication. But I wanted to sort of ask you guys what you thought are maybe the challenges to having this open dialogue with your students, because I have come up against resistance in the past to this concept. So I thought I'd throw that out to you and see what you guys thought.
Um, I'll begin. I think one of the challenges of having this open conversation with students is that students might begin to expect it all the time and in all situations, and you can't always that there'll be a time and a place for it, but you can't always. And then, if you're not firm and you don't draw your boundaries really clearly, there will come a time where they want, bespoke, even in a classroom, of 10, 12, 20,
Mhm.
they'll want something special, so to speak, for
Yeah,
for themselves. And
yeah,
maybe, I think, sorry, and maybe because so that's the one thing, but the other thing is to have that discussion and to give them the sense that we're working with them. They may not want to be challenged in future because they'll
Mhm.
be always thinking, okay, well, I'll always get something that's more suited to my level, and maybe they don't get that N+1 at
Yeah.
some point where you as a teacher think, this is a good point where I can actually give you something to push you to make you, you know,
Yeah.
get better, make you get to where you want to get.
Yeah. I do think it's really interesting that idea that you said sort of there of, um, they'll want completely tailored things. And I always come up against this with the term student centered. And for me, I don't know again what you guys think, but I feel like it's our job as a teacher to decide where we're going. And we have to have some sort of goal, some sort of curriculum behind it. We have to know that across time we are progressing and developing something. The student centered is helping them get there in their own way. But I think sometimes people think it means tailor the whole lesson and let
Mm.
them choose almost. I don't know. Neil, you look like you had something to say there.
I think when students pay for a course, they are actually investing in the expertise or hopefully the expertise that the teacher brings. If I want to learn to fly an aircraft, I ask a teacher to help me because then I'm going to learn how to do it. And I think as teachers who are invested in student-centered, personalized learning pathways, that doesn't take away from the fact that we are providing expertise, knowledge, and experience. That doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to our learners, what they learn and how they learn it. But I think, going back to one of the very first words that you used in the video was dialogic.
Mm.
There is this synergy I think we get where we involve the student and want to hear from them, but they're going to get more value when we're part of that dialogue. Um, Also, going back to your point about kind of the process, I think students are going to be resistant if they've never had this before. What's the teacher doing?
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean to say it's a bad thing. And again, it's the open discussion. It goes very meta. An open discussion about the open discussion. I'm going to do something today that you may not have experienced before, and that might be a bit strange for you, but it's okay. Bear
Mhm.
with me. This is why I'm doing it. Let's now try it. And if it doesn't work perfectly the first time, well, that's what we should expect.
Yeah.
I think we have to in, go on and take our students on a learner training journey and help them to understand how this will be of benefit.
Yeah. It's challenging with continuous enrollment and you're constantly reset to the first day with them. I think it's worth it though. Like I think if you, as you say, if we think that this dialogue is worth it, then we've got to invest the time. Lana, what were your thoughts?
Well, first, thank you very much for your ideas. I really enjoyed the strategies that you showed and the framework. I think they are absolutely useful. For me, differentiation is actually part of the mix of effective learning, just part. It's like part of the equation. I think that the open dialogue should be there, definitely. But at the same time, there should be learner agency, learner autonomy, personalization, and differentiation coming together. And if we manage to hit that sweet spot, then we'll be able to open the dialogue and and help them learn better. Because differentiation on its own, I'm not really sure that it will be absolutely successful if a learner does not have a proper level of self-regulation. That is learner autonomy, because then the dialogue will just stay there, probably for that class, and probably, most likely, that will be just a waste of time.
Yeah.
So I think that tasks should have differentiation. And I think differentiation is actually key, because whenever we have more than 2 humans in the group, we already have a mixed ability group, right?
Yeah.
Because we are all unique with our own interests, abilities, you name it. So that's already differentiation coming in place. At the same time, we need to focus on integrating various components of learner agency, that is letting them make choices about their learning, learner autonomy, taking ownership of their learning, differentiating, letting them learn the way that works best for them, and personalization, making sure that they connect to the material on a personal level. So learning becomes meaningful. So if I made myself clear.
No, I think so, and it has to be like, I think it's a really hard one, because I think what
Because we
we're
have
all,
kind of like 2 levels. The
yeah,
first level is the level of particular strategies that we might be using in the classroom. And the other level is actually the level where we talk about effective learning experiences and the components of them, where differentiation is just part of that.
is the two kind of challenges, and I think it feeds to what everyone's been saying. The two challenges are that I get when I start talking about this type of framework is great, yeah, 100%, but my students aren't able to do that on day one, so I'm not going to do it. And the other one is great, but I'm a kind of new teacher, and that came up in the chat window. So Kanduk, how do you feel? 'Cause in terms of teacher training, do you feel this is sort of realistic for newer teachers coming into the industry?
I think novice teachers, when they first come into the classroom, the first 6 months, or anybody who's in a new teaching environment, not necessarily just novice teachers, when they come into a new school, into a new classroom, they've got so much to master. First of all, there's so much cognitive load, more so for the novice teacher. You've had your teacher training behind you, right? You've got your subject knowledge, you've got your pedagogical knowledge, and you're coming in, and then you're there, right? And you're trying to pull out all the stops, and then you've got to go a step further. And that, I think, takes experience, one thing, to be able to read the classroom. That's what I tell a lot of my trainee teachers. We can give you, advice during your training. We can say, here's some principles, here's some frameworks. But at the end of the day, there's 2 things that you have to bear in mind, is that what do I feel comfortable doing and confident doing? Because if you're doing it just for the sake of doing it, because it's the done thing, or everybody's doing it now, or it's expected of me, if you're not comfortable and confident in doing it, it'll fall flat. And then you'll go away thinking, oh no, I tried to do, differentiation. I tried to work, with these 3 levels, and it totally failed. And I think that's a rubbish strategy. For example, when in effect, it's the experience that you're lacking, or the confidence. And then the second thing I tell them is, having decided for yourself what your teacher personality will be, the second thing is to learn to read your classroom. And that, I think, comes with experience. It's not easy. It really, really isn't easy to read all those faces, those personalities in the classroom if you're new.
It's hard, isn't it? I got throw something out there and see what you guys think about it. Is I think one of the issues we have in our industry is because everything you just said is true. As a novice teacher, as a brand new off whatever training program you're going in, there's so much to think about. But from day one, we are further trained and kind of almost pigeonholed by the materials we use. The materials, like I went in, I was an English speaker, but I didn't know anything about grammar. And I learned to teach grammar from the books I used. And the books I used told me that the most valuable thing to do in the classroom was to teach grammar and vocabulary and to check comprehension in a very formulaic way. And I think one of the issues we have is that autonomy and that those discussions about learning are not on the page. So we only have pre-start to help people with it, and then maybe whatever happens at the school. But Neil, you look like you want to say it.
What I love about being part of this gallery teacher community is that, I'm sitting here as part of the panel, and I just feel as if my entire teacher training persona has just been turned upside down. And that's wonderful, because the learning opportunities for all of us. And it just strikes me that what has been missing, and Conduct, you've kind of caused the light bulb to go off in what you've just said, is that we're talking here about open discussions. But I don't think we have those same open discussions. I certainly don't have enough of them, I've just realized, in initial teacher training.
Mm.
There is a disconnect between the training program and then the expectation as the newly qualified trainee moves into the classroom that somehow it's over and the new stage begins. It's a liminal moment in certain respects, and this is kind of what I think the British Council in the UK is trying to do at the moment. And, John Hattie, thank you very much indeed. The recognition that the first year of a teacher's journey post initial qualification is one of the most important.
Mm.
That's when the learning happens. So going back to your point about language awareness, grammar knowledge, you're never going to complete all of that on a training program. Likewise, if it's knowing how to give feedback, we know that that is late acquired. And perhaps we need to be having an open discussion with our trainees very early on level 5 programs. It's not the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know in philology degrees, 3-4 year degrees in European and other universities, how this is managed.
Mm.
But do we have that open discussion about some things on this course you're not going to get until after it's finished, and that is okay.
Yeah.
Here are some of the ones that a lot of people find difficult. Don't worry, it'll come later on. And I suppose a question for everyone here, not just the 4 of us, but for our participants as well, is differentiation one of those late acquired areas?
Mm.
I think, well, if I just share our context at in German universities, when young people go into the teacher education program, they study 2 subjects, which will be their school teaching subject, and they study education science as a 3rd subject. They do a bachelor's first in these 3 subjects, and then they go on to a master's of education. That's the 2nd training stage. Differentiation is taught, and I think what you're saying, what you were asking, is differentiation something for a later stage? They're taught the theories of it, right? They're introduced to it. All my students, they know, these are buzzwords at the moment in the German education system: differentiation and inclusion. Or inclusive education. These are the buzzwords, but knowing how to effectively differentiate, knowing how to implement differentiation in any of your lesson planning frameworks, that I think comes later. And I think from what I'm doing with my students, I only see it happening with those who've had some classroom experience, because otherwise it's just a buzzword flying around, same as the idea of concept questions, right? In teacher education, you teach them, when you teach grammar, don't forget concept questions. They're all buzzwords that are floating all over their heads. I think these things only become a reality when they're in the classroom, and then they can make the 2 connect.
But isn't this kind of true for everything as well? Like, effective teaching of language, effective teaching of pronunciation, drilling, effective, all of this stuff, even the most obvious of like CCQs can, like you hone it kind of as you go.
Mm.
My worry sometimes with differentiation and not even differentiate, like dialogic, just discussing learning in the classroom is we feel like we shouldn't encourage newer teachers to do it. Whereas the reality is they're the ones that are going in and need to have a dialogue most with their students. They're the ones that need to start learning about their students. Like you said, reading the classroom is so hard. You get that. But if you haven't started by having conversations, so how did you find that? How are you feeling
Mm.
on that? What are you interested in learning about? How was that feedback for you? You just get kind of, I don't know, I feel like teachers aren't getting the opportunity to develop these skills because
Mm.
we're sort of keeping it from them a little bit. But I don't know. Lana, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts when you said the word, you are concerned about differentiation. My concern is that we cannot actually reach full-scale differentiation, regardless of the experience we have. Primarily because if you work in the context, I mean, we talk a lot about learner agency, right?
Mm,
Learner autonomy. But when you work in the context where you have standardized testing or you train your students for IELTS,
yeah.
right? And you have a group, you can differentiate certain processes, right, or certain activities. At the same time, there is always this pressure coming from the fact that they will be sitting one exam non-differentiated. So
Mhm.
assessment in most countries, I would say, is not differentiated at all. So how do we balance
Mhm.
this requirement to teachers to differentiate the content within the class, while later on when students leave it, they have to go and sit one fits all exam?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah.
I
I
think that,
sorry, go
sorry,
on. Nick.
I mean, I think that comes back to your point, David, about course books.
Mm,
There is a commercial expediency that a course book is an artificial construct for a imaginary group of students in the mind of the author or author group and the editor that does its very best as a compromise. Um, and if we start thinking about assessment, Lana, absolutely, it's the same thing. It's a one size does not fit all, but at this point, and I think this is a topic for another day, what opportunities does AI offer in terms
mm,
of assessment? Um, Now, I think if any of you follow Jeffrey Jordan, based in
Mm.
Barcelona, who has very interesting and very radical thoughts about the ELT industry, I mean, I'm sure he would have a lot to say here. But it strikes me that differentiation, and I had genuinely, to my shame, not thought about this as we're doing right now, does have to come in, Kanduk, your point, come in really early.
mm.
First demo lesson, demonstrate differentiation in action on a teacher training program. Talk about what was going on. Bring in the personal experience of the trainees. Have they had lessons that were like this? Were they the beneficiaries of a differentiated lesson? More and more, our trainees will have seen it in their own learning in school, and then say to them, "Well, this is where you're going towards, but your journey to get there may be at different rates."
Mm.
And when it happens, it's like the point where the trainee stops thinking about what they're doing in the classroom and starts attending totally to the learners. Maybe it's one of those liminal moments of moving towards, and it came up in chat, unconscious competence,
I
perhaps.
like that. Yeah. Mm,
David, can I just
mm,
come back? Because you talked about lesson frameworks just
mm.
now. And maybe this is an opportunity to hear what everyone has to say about PPP, present, practice, produce. We see it in course books very often. It is a dominant mode in ELT. There are, of course, alternatives. Seems to me that what you were setting up in terms of that telling a story
Mm.
is much more about a task. And I just wondered, therefore, if you can help us to kind of see how differentiation can work with different lesson frameworks.
Yeah.
Does it work with PPP?
So
If
I
so, how?
yeah,
And
I feel it does. I mean, look, like I spend a lot of time in course books in my job. My job is a curriculum manager for EC, so I'm sort of always in course books, and one of my roles within that is to I'm trying to sort of create the framework for teachers, this sort of moving towards this objective. So one of my jobs is literally to look at course book and write out the objective of that, because what course books tend to provide is what I'm calling the aims, the things they're going to do in it, and that real life thing at the end. But what I'm learning over the years is, and I kind of mentioned that a little bit in the video, that we're moving more towards this, is regardless of the course book, nearly all of the time, there's a final task or one just before it that is the culmination of everything that's kind of been looked at. I think that kind of this approach has more or less replaced your typical kind of PPP, or maybe just altered it a little bit, because that practice is more and more becoming a real life practice, a real life conversation that gives the opportunity to use the skills, right? The maybe the trickier one is the reading and listening skills based ones, because I think still in the industry, reading and listening skills tend to finish with a discussion about the topic as opposed to a discussion about the skills, and so that's needs some sort of adapting. But I think this applies to pretty much everything, because no matter what approach, if you're teaching a grammar lesson, you've got a topic, and if you have a topic, then you have a conversation, and then you have something to finish with. So I think this framework of knowing where you're going and knowing we're going to get you there in different ways is I've yet to see a kind of a lesson that it isn't relevant for, with a little bit of finagling, I suppose.
thank you.
One of the things I think is I want to jump in is this idea of objective, right? I'm always talking about objectives, and I get a lot of pushback from people when I bring up objectives, and it's something that is about when do you communicate. And obviously from the video, I'm very clear that I believe this is a discussion at the beginning of the lesson, but I do understand that there's a lot of people in the industry who really believe strongly that this should unfold and be revealed at the end. I don't know, Lana, do you have any sort of feelings on this?
Well, I'm a great fan of visible learning, so I try to incorporate the principles of visible learning in my teaching. So and initially I started my career as an ESP teacher. So we start with needs analysis first, and then clear objectives, clear situations, clear needs, and I love clarity in teaching. So I would say it's not like you have to start with objectives every single class you have. You may vary the way you communicate objectives to your students. Sometimes you listen to your students and they give you ideas that what you should start with next time. But I suppose that learners should be very well aware of what they are going to do and why they are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And just a particular example, I know that games are often referred as some sort of fun activities. They are not learning, right? They are playing games. And lots of learners actually believe that they are not learning. They are just playing games. And I think that the main issue here is not just about the game itself, but the problem that the teacher probably was not really successful in communicating the objectives of the activity, why they're actually doing what they're busy doing.
Yeah.
So that's answering the question whether objectives should be communicated. They should be,
Yeah.
and before, ideally. So
Yep.
Yeah.
I totally agree. However, I find that with my novice teachers, they always question, do we have to state the objectives for all learners? I am aware, and for those of you in the audience, if you're teaching adults, that adult learners will always have that question at the back of your head, even if they don't articulate it to you, why we're doing this. So, the more mature your learner, perhaps also the higher the level of your learner, right? When they're at C1, C2, maybe they've been, put into a language course by their employer or something, and they think, well, this is a total waste of my time. Then whatever you do, it'll be good. You engage them better if you articulate to them, we are doing this because, or at the end, after you've done this, you will be able to, right? These can-do statements, so to speak. With lower level learners, not necessarily. I think if you're at elementary, low pre-intermediate, that's two adjectives there. They may not necessarily want to know or need to know. They're just happy doing something. I do tell my novice teachers, though, that in the lesson planning stage, though, even if they don't end up articulating the objective of a particular task or game, they do need to have that in their lesson plan, because mine are still being examined, right? So I say to them, I said, your examiner is going to say, well, why did you choose to do that game as opposed to another game? Or why did you choose to put a game in here? And to say, well, I had 5 minutes left at the end of class, that's not, not the ideal answer, not the examinable answer that we want, right? But my novice teachers do struggle with it, especially if you're going through a textbook.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to support our teachers. I mean, that's one of, like, my thing has always been, I don't want people to teach like me. I just want everyone to talk about learning in the same way. So if I'm managing a school, I'll have the framework that we all operate within, but how you teach, I don't care. I want you to be you. I want you to be wonderful and to express yourself. But I do think if you're walking into a school, you need some support, even like not even as a new teacher, but a new teacher to a school. You need some support on what are the expectations in terms of discussing learning? How does the school expect feedback to happen? How does the school discuss or operate on aims? Someone just said there, I feel forever to take me to define learning objectives, because we all define them in completely different ways. And I think that's a challenge in the industry, all right.
I mean, the meta language, as I've just said in chat, doesn't help. I mean, what's an aim? What's an objective? What's a goal? What's a desired learning? Perhaps that's a session for a future gallery teacher session, Gabby. But I think, it does underpin a lot of the fear that I think certain teachers and academic managers have. I mean, for those of us working in the UK, I know that, one of the things that is looked at more and more and more is whether we state these learning, and I'm going to use the term outcome, at the beginning of the lesson or not, and whether it is appropriate to do so. I've got certain quite strong thoughts about this, but I'm not going to bore on about it. Do you think it's always important for them to be shared? Are there some lessons where they don't need to be, or can they sometimes be delayed? What do you all think? David, you've written a whole book basically about this.
Here, look. Look, I think you have to engage learners at the beginning of the lesson. That I do not mean the first 2 minutes or the first 5 minutes or whatever. I think there has to be a point before kind of the real input and everything starts, where you are clear about where you're going and where you're going to get to at the end. Because just as a human, that's engaging. Just doing stuff. I think sometimes we ask too much of our learners. We ask them to be in a second language doing an activity, and we ask them to sort of know that on a holistic level that's moving towards something bigger, but really they're just trying to achieve the task you've put in front of them. So I think it's us as facilitators of learning to be helping them to see how everything they're doing across the lesson is moving towards something bigger. So when they get there, it's not a surprise and they haven't forgotten all the other bits. But does that mean you need to walk in, slap the objectives on the board and go, this is what we're doing today? I don't really think so. I think there's space for activating schemata and engaging interest and motivation, and then going, so here, this is exactly what you're going to learn to be better at today. I think there's opportunity for reveals within it. But I don't like, my whole thing is just don't wait for the final moment to go, aha, look at what you can do now, because it's too late. You've lost them, is my belief. But I'm happy to be disagreed with. No disagreements coming. Okay.
Couldn't agree more.
I was waiting for someone to jump in and go, no, you're wrong. It should be revealed.
I've noticed in chat that quite a lot of people are asking about AI tools, and we've talked about weaving it in, but
Yes.
not for it to become the main focus. Is now the time to sort of address this question of,
Yes,
I mean,
Gabby.
my view is that we shouldn't be listing AI tools because what we talk about now in 3 months' time could be entirely inappropriate because of the speed with which things are progressing. And I guess also we don't want to be seen as a definitive list provider.
No.
I think also we have reservations about AI tools, how they're built, what they're built on in terms of the technology. Lana, I think this is your area of expertise, much more than certainly I know anything about. But how can we help people in a meaningful way to think about tools, not just as a list, but in terms of how to approach them meaningfully through the optic of differentiation?
Lana, go for it.
Well, I wouldn't like to go into technical details at the moment, but I think there is much to explore, like in terms of AI tools, how they function, in terms of responsibility, AI literacy. But I'm absolutely sure that before we start doing anything, before we integrate that into learning processes, we need to get AI literate, both teachers and learners. So teachers should know what they're dealing with, not third-party tools, I mean, but the technology itself, how it functions, and the weaknesses or constraints it has, and limitations it has, and the risks that it actually poses due to the way it functions. So that's AI literacy for teachers first. Students should also learn how to use AI tools for better learning. Because as I say, I've been experimenting with lots of tools. I've built about 7 bots for my learners for particular tasks to help them acquire reading skills, to help them with chatting. And at our next session on personalization, I will be showcasing some of the bots. And I've got more than 1,000 students who tried these bots. And then I was checking all the chats with students. And what I saw was the following. Students who were trained to use chatbots, who know how to use them for better learning, my students, actually, who I trained how to use the chatbot, how to ask for feedback, how to clarify, how to finish up the conversation and make sure that you've learned something. They benefited and they managed to go through the chat and they got their feedback, personalized feedback. Students who came there randomly via my blog, because I published the open link for the chatbots. Those students who came there just randomly, probably directed by their teachers, they didn't manage to go through the chat. I mean, some of them chatted with the chatbot, but I think they didn't work out what the principle was. So this go and chat thingy does not work. Students need to be prepared. That's the first part. The second one, we need to monitor. We need to have control. And I would say before we introduce an AI tool in the classroom, we need to make sure that we have control over this tool. Not the third party ruling out the pedagogy there, right? And monitoring. But we need to have access to all the technicalities of the tool, the prompt that powers that tool. That's first. And second, we need to make sure that we have access to all the chats and we can correct the behavior of the bot, because again, it's always kind of a game of chance. Whenever you use an AI tool, that's a game of chance. I'm not talking about assessment platforms. They already have coding platforms, coding involved heavily. I'm talking mainly about generative AI here. So in terms of generative AI, we need control, we need transparency, we need to figure out what it means to be a responsible user and how it benefits learning, the value that it adds to the learning process.
I think that's really important, isn't it? It's the benefit, isn't it? I think someone mentioned there, I can't see it in the chat, it was someone there a second ago. Students can misunderstand the intention when you use these things. And again, I think it's like it's exactly the same as going back to the point we made about games and just doing a game without being clear why we're bringing this into the classroom. I am so wary of AI tools being used gimmicky and novelty in the classroom. Like, look at this cool, fun thing it can do. It's turned a YouTube video into 70 million exercises. And it's, oh, what am I getting from it? What was the point? And this is why I think it has to exist within. We're moving here for this. This adds to this. I'm really enjoying at the moment using Gemini or ChatGPT, whatever one you're interested in. For it sort of is to do with differentiation because it's encouraging choice and things like that. But in writing lessons, just getting, instead of having one model that comes from the course book, just getting it to recreate different models in different tones, different styles, different form, and talking to the students about how they want to come across, as opposed to just how write this using the grammar and vocabulary that was in the book. So now students have like 5 or 6 models, and they can look at commonalities and then make a choice of, these are the words that are appropriate for me at my level. These are the language points appropriate for me at my level. And this is the tone. I want to be friendly. I want to be formal. I want to be direct. I want to be mean. I don't know, whatever they want to be. But there's a lot of choice. And I feel like AI, especially in writing skills lessons, it gives us so much opportunity to manage differentiation and to enable choice and kind of responsibilities. I think that's a lot of fun. I don't know if you guys have done other interests, but I 100% agree, Alana, that we got to start with literacy of teachers and work with our students and make sure they understand safe use. But I do think I don't want to wait. I don't want to gatekeep it to some extent. I just want to get people talking about it in class, using it a tiny bit, much like just differentiation. If we wait until everyone's ready to attain it, it's kind of too late, I think, to some extent.
So is this, you talked about using AI tools, Gemini is in that case in point, for writing a summary. So if I try and summarize what you've just both said, it would be that we need to be very mindful of AI. We need to recognize the dangers that exist in the use of ChatGPT or Gemini. To go back on something that Lan was saying before the session began, the temperature setting for this concern that what it is spitting out has a lack of control, that in a bot that we create ourselves, we can create more control in order to get more pedagogically appropriate tools out. But therefore, perhaps for the busy teacher who doesn't have the expertise to create their own bot, that it would be about, if you're asking it to produce 5 or 6 models using different tone, that the teacher must spend time mediating the output.
Yeah.
And the same would be true for a reading comprehension set of questions, a gap fill to go with a listening text, a summary or subtitles of a listening, in order to use their expertise to layer over. So it's a bit like process writing. The AI output is the first draft.
Yeah.
What happens is what we bring as teachers, our pedagogical understanding, our proofreading skills over and above that. Kanduk, what do you do with AI?
Well, I was going to throw a question out here in terms of students using AI, and that is, do you think students at a higher level of language competence, of English language competence, are able to use AI more critically, more appropriately, and better? Because I think, don't tell anybody, but I use AI for when I have to write complex things in German. I speak German, right? I have a decent level of competence in German, but I look at what that AI has produced. Well, I use mainly DeepL, which is the translation tool. And so I write my text or my email in English and it translates. But I read the German translation and I know, right, certain technical terminology or, education related terminology, and I look at what has been produced by generative AI and I say, no, well, that's not how we would say that in German. So I think, right, and when I see it at the other end of the spectrum, when my students use AI and write an email to me, I know clearly it's not their voice.
Yeah.
And then you also see, certain phrasings, multi-word units that are just off where you would say as an English speaker, nah, that's not what we would say. So my question is there a level with your learners where you would just say, no, you've got to first master the language or come to a certain level of competence before we can let you loose on AI tools?
A hugely interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'll just say quickly, my thing is from working with lots of teachers who obviously are, very good at English. I don't think it's necessarily about English level. I think it's level of critical thinking, knowledge of AI, and it's AI literacy, as like Lana mentioned, because I'm getting sent things and going, this student, this is AI. And I'm like, 100% that's not AI. It might be the student has used translation tools or has pulled a couple of things. That's not AI generated. I can see the student within it. So I don't know if it's language level. I think it's criticality and AI literacy, but I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah. I'll just mention that quickly because I know that we are finishing up already.
Oops.
Maybe at your writing session, remember that session on writing, AI for writing, you gave a fantastic tip to teachers. Teach students to keep their voice.
Yes.
And I think that if we focus on, if our students get this idea that whenever you use a tool, you should keep your voice, right? Then it will probably somehow help us tackle this issue of students overusing, over-relying on AI tools, right? Or using or replacing their voice with the voice of the machine.
Yeah.
So use your own voice.
I think that comes back to there was a question there we didn't. It's very interesting, and I know we're at the end, but what would I say to a student who says I don't want to do this because AI can do it? It's exactly that answer. It's look at it and go, but that's not you. What is the reason you have for writing or communicating? If the reason is to just complain to an airport, then yeah, fill your boots, use AI. I'd use it more or less. Just go, there you go, send that off, because my aim is to get a refund. My aim is not to create or generate something. So I think we do have to be having these conversations with our learners about when it is cool to just go straight AI with a little edit and when it is something that should be undeniably yours. But that's a big question. So sorry for rushing.